Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Jessie Haas. I'm the National Director of Programs at Pet Partners. This is a Facebook Live called Volunteering with Your Pet. Before I go any further, I'm just going to check and make sure folks are hearing me and that I'm actually live, because sometimes it takes a second for folks to see me, so I don't want to get too deep into this. Oh, great. Okay, Bree, thank you for chiming in. Let me know that you can hear me. So I will actually formally get started then and let you know again that my name is Jessie Haas. I'm the National Director of Programs at Pet Partners. This is a Facebook Live that we call Volunteering with Your Pet. And I am going to cover information related to what does it actually look and feel like to be a therapy animal volunteer together with your pet. And then from there, I'm going to go into talking about what are the actual requirements and what does training and evaluation look like in order to become registered and begin volunteering and visiting on behalf of Pet Partners. So that's what I'll be going through today. Obviously, given that topic or topics, you can tell that it is going to be mostly geared towards folks who are prospective volunteers, people who aren't yet a member of Pet Partners. But if you are an existing or a current volunteer and you're here and listening, please hang out. We love having you. Type in the comments or share your experiences. New people love hearing from our more experienced and existing volunteers. So everybody is welcome. Before I go any further, I do want to ask you all a couple of questions just so I know who is listening and watching. I would love to know, of course, what kind of animal you have. So if you have a dog, cat, horse, guinea pig, rabbit, whatever it might be. I would also love to hear more about where you are at in your journey with Pet Partners. So are you at the very beginning? This is sort of the first you're hearing about what therapy animal volunteerism with Pet Partners looks like. Or are you somebody who is kind of halfway through the process and you're just getting some clarifying information? Or are you somebody who pretty much knows everything and you're ready to get started? It'd be helpful for me to know where you are in your journey. And then lastly, you can also tell me if there's any special topics or questions you want to make sure I cover. So again, in the comments, let me know what kind of animal you have. Let me know where you are in your journey with Pet Partners, and then any specific things you want to learn about today. And I will loop back to those things as I move through the content. I see a couple of people have put in comments, but I'll just let those keep flowing in as I get further into the presentation. So we can start with our first slide. So I think it's really helpful to give you all a context of what does therapy animal volunteerism look like. And the best way to start explaining that is say, where is it that therapy animal teams volunteer? And the first thing I actually want to say is when I'm talking about teams, I mean one handler with one animal. Together, you become a team who goes out into your community and volunteers. And we have about 10,000 volunteers worldwide. The most are in the United States, but they are in some select other countries as well. And all of those 10,000 teams go to facilities at the facility's invitation to kind of spread the healing power of the human-animal bond. So up on your screen, you'll see the types of places where a lot of our teams visit. Now, this list is not exhaustive, but it is a representation of some of the most common options for therapy animal teams once they become registered and insured and are able to go out and visit on behalf of Pet Partners. We can go to the next slide. In terms of what a therapy animal visit looks like, and what it feels like or what people are doing, again, that can be very depending on the team, but a lot of the visits that our therapy animal teams do are social visits. So these are an opportunity for the handler and the animal to bring a smile to somebody's face, to cheer them up, to reduce isolation, to provide a distraction from a difficult time. Think about a team who might volunteer in a hospital and maybe they go from room to room and visit with patients who are obviously probably experiencing something difficult. And again, it's that opportunity to cheer them up or provide a welcome distraction. Some of our visits are more formal or structured in nature. That might happen in conjunction with a physical or occupational therapist, for example. In these cases, what that looks like is a professional might be working with a client. Let's say it's a physical therapist at a rehab center, and they will invite a team to come join their session. And maybe the client who might be working on something like fine motor skills, or rehabbing from a hand or a wrist injury, something like that. When the team is present, the client might be more motivated to participate in some of those exercises. So maybe the physical therapist has the client brush the dog or pet the cat in a certain way. And so we do see therapy animal teams volunteer in, again, this more structured or formal way. A lot of our teams volunteer in reading programs. We have our own reading program called Read With Me. And essentially, these are literacy-based visits where teams will often go to a school or a library, and they will be there as typically a child is learning how to read or practicing how to read. And as you can imagine, a dog, a cat, a horse, a rabbit, that again can be a motivator for the person who's learning to read, but it can also feel very non-judgmental and can feel less intimidating to read out loud to an animal, and frankly, a lot more fun as well. So we see a lot of literacy-based volunteerism as well. And then stress breaks were something I wanted to mention because it's definitely growing in popularity, particularly in airports or in universities where people are under a lot of stress, especially on a university campus. It might be around finals time. So oftentimes our teams will be invited by the university to participate in a stress break visit where the students can interact with the animals and get a little bit of relief from some of the difficulties that they might be experiencing at that moment in time. So these are just a sample of some of the types of visits our teams do. We can go to the next slide. I would be remiss not to mention that we are a program that is inclusive of 9 different species. Dogs absolutely are the most common, but we are always seeking more and welcome with totally open arms all other species that are on this list here, because each has their own kind of unique capability to, again, provide that healing power that an animal can provide. There are things that a rabbit might bring to the table that a dog cannot. Or there might be people who are allergic to dogs or fearful of dogs. And so a cat might be a good option in that situation. So we are inclusive of these 9 species. Before we go to the next slide, I'm actually just going to hop over to the comments because I know I asked at the beginning what kind of animal people have. It looks like several dogs, not surprisingly, as I said. But it looks like we have somebody interested in volunteering with a rabbit, so that's wonderful. Rabbits are definitely growing in popularity in terms of therapy animal visitation, so happy to welcome rabbits. All right, we can go to the next slide. So now I've sort of let you know what a therapy animal visit looks like, where it takes place, and so I want to move on to what does it mean in terms of commitment if you decide to become a volunteer with Pet Partners. So ultimately, you get a lot of control, and you're empowered to sort of define where you want to volunteer and how often you want to volunteer. You can arrange visits yourself directly with facilities. We as an organization don't place any sort of minimum requirements in terms of the hours that you need to volunteer on behalf of Pet Partners. It's really up to you. We have a lot of individuals who volunteer just a couple hours a month. We have other people who volunteer multiple hours a week. Some volunteers have one facility they go to regularly. Other volunteers kind of do maybe a little bit more one-off visits where they do this facility this month and a different facility next month. It's really up to you. We do provide our volunteers with a directory of volunteer opportunities where facilities like the ones I mentioned in the very first slide would come to our website. They would input their information, what they're looking for in terms of species or what they're looking for in terms of commitment. And then you as a volunteer, once registered, can reach out to those facilities and get something set up. But I will say, with as many volunteers as we have, literally thousands, there are a lot of facilities facilities that already welcome pet partners teams who may not list in our directory because they have another way to sort of find teams or recruit teams. So we do try to support you with the facility directory if you want to go that route, but also you can approach facilities on your own and ask them if they would like to have a pet partners therapy animal team visit and kind of get it set up on your own. You're totally empowered to do that. When you are considering time commitment, it is important to remember that, there's the visit itself, which in any given day can never exceed 2 hours. We don't want teams volunteering for more than 2 hours a day because that's very tiring for any animal. A lot of our volunteers only visit an hour or 90 minutes when they go. And I do see that we have some current volunteers watching this live. So if you have a certain volunteer schedule or the amount of time you typically visit with your animal, throw it up in the comments. I'm sure people would like to hear more about that. But however long your visit's going to be, let's say it's 90 minutes, you also have to remember that there is some preparation time on the beginning that you should account for. So bathing of animals, grooming of animals, that's part of our infection prevention and control policies, where we want animals to be as clean as possible before they're going into some of these facilities. But also on the back end, there is time often that your animal needs to unwind. Again, as I said, this can be quite tiring. So if you do a therapy animal visit, you can't think that then you can go to the vet or the dog park or whatever. Usually your animal is going to need some time to decompress. It might be maybe the only thing that they do that day. So this is just some things to consider in terms of your time commitment when you do become a volunteer. We can go to the next slide. All right, so now that I've set the context in terms of what therapy animal volunteerism looks like, I want to get into the nitty gritty, especially for those of you who are not pet partners teams yet. What are the eligibility requirements and what is the process that you have to go through? So let's start with eligibility requirements, specifically age. So for pocket pets, and that includes rabbits for the individual who has a rabbit listening, they must be at least 6 months old. For all other species, they need to be at least a year. You also need to consider as well how long you've had your animal living in your home with you. For birds, we require that the animal has lived in the home for a year. For all others, it is 6 months. So you may have adopted an animal who's 3 years old, and that animal would be eligible by age, but until they've lived with you for 6 months, they can't yet evaluate and join the program. Now, when I talk about that, 6 months or a year for age and the length of time they've lived with you, I do want to remind you that you can start some of the process prior to that. So if you have this 3-year-old cat and you can tell pretty quickly that they might be suitable for therapy animal volunteerism, you can't evaluate with them, which then you need to complete that before you can actually register and volunteer. You can do things before you evaluate. You can take the required coursework, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. You can do some training and work on things that you'll need to pass the evaluation or skills that will make you a successful therapy animal team. You can visit your veterinarian, which is another step of the process that I'll talk about. So you can start to work on the process prior to when you hit these time requirements. It's just you cannot evaluate until that happens. Of course, all animals must be house trained or potty trained. Waste collection devices are not allowed. The one exception is white suits for birds. It is important to note that all animals must be leashed at all times during the evaluation, as well as on every single therapy animal visit. And that goes for all animals, not just for dogs or horses where you might be used to a lead or a leash. It goes for all animals. So if you have an animal that maybe isn't accustomed to a leash, that is something you're going to want to address before you get to the evaluation and before you register with pet partners. I do want to point out that animals cannot be fed a raw protein diet, and animals cannot have a history of aggression towards people or towards other animals either. That's especially important because as therapy animal volunteerism grows in popularity and as more and more places become pet friendly, when you are out volunteering on behalf of pet partners, you are likely to see other animals. And that's why that aggression applies towards both people and towards other animals. We want therapy animals to be non-aggressive to both types of beings they might interact with. Um, we want animals to be in good health and to be comfortable. In order to join the program. We don't want an animal who is in a lot of pain. It would be unfair to ask them to participate in therapy animal visitation. There are some medications that are not allowed, particularly antifungals, antibiotics, and immunosuppressives. So if your animal is on, say, a maintenance dose of this where they're always on it, they are not eligible to participate. I will say that, of course, there are times where our registered animals, they may get ill and need to take one of those medications, and that's fine. They can just take a break from visiting until the course of treatment is done and a short waiting period after it's done, and then they can return. But if you're planning to join and your animal has a long-term medical issue that is treated with a medication, there are certain ones that would disqualify your animal. I will tell you that the best thing you can do if your animal is on a medication is to reach out to us in the early stages of the process, and we can let you know if it falls into one of the categories where it's problematic versus a category where it's no issue at all. I did want to touch briefly here as well on animals with disabilities. We do have animals who do have a disability and they can participate successfully. I'll just say that in most cases, they need to be able to pass the evaluation pretty similarly or totally similarly to any other animal. So disabilities are absolutely okay, but they still need to be able to progress through that evaluation and, again, be comfortable visiting. And then the last thing to mention, of course, is that animals must have species-specific obedience skills that I'll talk a little bit more about in, I think, a slide or two. We can advance to the next one. I'm just going to check over on the comments here. Yeah, Sherry, I really like that you chimed in around length of visits, which is something I talked about a few slides ago, where I mentioned that 2 hours is the limit per day. Most of our volunteers don't hit that 2-hour limit. And Sherry made a really helpful comment that, especially when you're first starting, to keep your visits really short, just to see how your animal kind of responds and just to kind of get used to it. Like anything, people or animals, we need kind of a slower on ramp. Um, and that also goes for current teams who maybe have taken some breaks from visiting due to the pandemic. We make the same recommendation for them that when they return after a break, which I suppose a break can happen as well if your animal's ill or you're ill or something means you can't visit, maybe you're out of town for several months, something like that. Doing those shorter visits initially and then progressing up to a longer one is always a good way to start. All right, so I just talked about basic eligibility. But I want to talk about some broader things that make a therapy animal successful. And these are things that you should be thinking about when it comes to your specific animal and asking yourselves questions about what they enjoy, how they interact with strangers, and that will help you sort of determine if, yeah, they meet the eligibility, but is this actually right for them? So the first thing is, of course, to consider whether your animal is people-oriented, sociable, and friendly. But I want to point out that that also applies to being people-oriented, sociable, and friendly to strangers, including oftentimes the very first time they meet them. I know that I have had a dog in the past who I would call people-oriented, social, and friendly, but the first few times he meets somebody new, he would want to sort of hang behind my legs a little bit. And he wouldn't have been suitable for therapy animal volunteerism because when you do this, a lot of the times you are seeing different people every single time. And so it wouldn't have been something he would have enjoyed or necessarily succeeded at because of his initial shyness towards strangers. Related to that, they need to remain calm and comfortable with being touched by others, again, by strangers. Also, sometimes, depending on where you're volunteering, the way that a person might interact with your pet is going to be a style of petting or interaction that they may not be used to. Now, as a handler, one of your roles is to help guide people in terms of, hey, my cat really likes to be scratched behind the ears, doesn't like so much to be scratched on its rear end or something like that. So you can certainly guide it, but you also have to understand that sometimes in therapy animal visit settings, they are going to be touched by strangers in a way they may not be accustomed to. So you need to have an animal who's kind of adaptable and flexible to that and sort of lets it roll off their back as much as possible. And then in terms of obedience skills, during the evaluation, you are going to be asked to work with your animal through a series of species-specific obedience exercises. For canines, that's going to look like sit, stay, come when called, things of that nature. We are not looking for obedience stars. We are not looking for animals that have, competed in obedience trials or anything like that. We're looking for good basic skills that a lot of people can teach their animals at home, or they can enroll in a basic, at least in the case of dogs, a basic dog training course and sort of build those skills. But I will say also with obedience skills, a big part of it is, can you and your animal work as a team around obedience to the point where the animal can reliably respond to commands even when there's a lot of distractions? I know that there's a lot of dogs who can do a sit great in their house, but if you were to take them to PetSmart and there's all these sights and sounds and smells, they may not listen and follow that same command. And I'll just tell you now that in the evaluation, there are a lot of intentional distractions to help evaluate whether or not the animal can meet these basic obedience requirements. So that is something you need to be thinking about. A lot of animals can get there. It just may take you a little bit more time if you're finding that your animal gets easily distracted. We can go to the next slide. Something that Pet Partners really believes in is that this is a team effort between you and your animal. A lot of people want to focus, and that's why I covered it first. What are the requirements for the animal, and what kind of temperament should the animal have? But we believe the handler is 50% of the team. And in some ways, they can be more important because they are guiding the interaction between their animal and the clients, patients, or students that they're visiting. It really is on the handler in a lot of cases to make sure that therapy animal visits are safe and effective. So this whole idea of a team, and it's 50% animal, 50% human, is actually carried through right into our evaluation that every team needs to go through. And we're going to talk in depth about that in a moment. But in the evaluation, 50% of the score is all up to the handler and 50% is up to the animal. So your cat could pass 100% with flying colors. But if you as a handler aren't doing what you're supposed to do, which our training covers, you may not pass the evaluation because of errors on your part as a handler. So in terms of successful handlers, of course, we want our handlers to be friendly, professional, and polite, and to remember that you are going to be interacting with a lot of strangers in most cases. We ask that our handlers are able to really predict and redirect their animal's behavior. So that comes back to being in tune. So before your animal might get overexcited by something, let's say there's a nice steak on somebody's table at the nursing care facility, you're going to predict, okay, that's going to be really enticing to my animal. What can I do in this situation? I'm going to redirect and sit over here and ask the person to come sit with me when they're done eating, or to take a break from eating. So that's what I'm talking about in predicting, redirecting your animal's responses to certain distractions or triggers that may happen in a therapy animal visit. As a handler, you are responsible for ensuring your animal's well-being at all times. One example of this, and we already talked about this whole concept of length of visiting, but you may have told the local school that you'd be able to be there for 90 minutes. But you notice around 45 minutes that your animal is really tired and they aren't really enjoying the visit anymore. It's up to you to say, I'm sorry, I have to end the visit early today. Fluffy's not feeling it right now. I would be happy to reschedule for tomorrow or the next day, or whatever you want to do. But that's just an example of making sure you're in tune with your animal, taking their cues around their well-being, because we as an organization are very committed to animal welfare, and our animals are volunteers as well. They shouldn't be forced to do things they don't want to do, or forced to do things that don't make them feel great. So that's another thing we look for. And then of course we want all of our handlers to follow Pet Partners policies and procedures, which is a part of our training. By following our policies and procedures, you stay registered and you get to use our insurance. But without following those policies and procedures, you can't be registered and our insurance won't apply. So it's really important to understand all of those. We can go to the next slide. So I'm going to spend the last few slides, or probably about 10 minutes here, talking about the process for becoming a therapy animal team, because now you know what therapy animal visitation looks like. You know what the requirements are for you and your animal. So now you're ready to get going. What does that look like? Up on your screen are 4 steps of the registration process. When we say registered, that means you've completed all steps and now you are eligible to go out and visit as a Pet Partners team. There are a few other steps than what are listed here, but the other steps are pretty brief and mostly administrative, so I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about them. Instead, I want to focus a little bit more on the fact that there are these 4 that take a little bit more time or are critically important. The only 2 I think I'm going to dive really deep into is step 2 and step 3, which are the required training for handlers. I'm sorry, step 2 and 4. I think I said 2 and 3. 2 and 4. So step 4 is passing your team evaluation, which people generally have a lot of questions about. So let's get to those by going to the next slide. Handler training. So as I already talked about, Pet Partners is very much focused on the handler as much as the animal. Therefore, the only training we require you to go through is for the handler. And that can be taken either online or in person. It's really up to you which format you choose. Generally speaking, right now, the online course is available obviously at any time. You can start it whenever you want. But there are some workshops. That is what we call the in-person, the workshop versus the online course. There are some workshops available as well if you really want to do things in person, but the point is that you have the choice. In the handler training, obviously we concentrate on the human end of the leash, and some of the things I already talked about. You noticed in the comments, one of my colleagues wrote YAYABA, which is an acronym that stands for You Are Your Animal's Best Advocate. So we go over that in terms of always advocating for your animal's well-being. We go over something called PETS, which is presence, eye contact, touch, and speech, which is the ways in which you can support your animal. So presence, you're close to them. Eye contact, you obviously meet eyes with them. Touch might be actually physically touching your animal, and speech is of course speaking to your animal. And these are all ways throughout visits, even if your animal is having a great time, feels super comfortable, always applying pets even in really in good circumstances. It's something we teach you in handler training. Both YAYABA and pets are things that we look for in the evaluation. So those are some of the things that you get scored on, is are you doing those things for your animal? Also in the training, we go through all of the policies and procedures, the few I already mentioned, the 2-hour visit rule, always having your animal on leash, and there are some other policies as well. Once you complete the training, you are eligible to go through the evaluation process. So we can go to the next slide and talk about that. So the team evaluation is this kind of summative step in all of the registration steps you need to go through. It's sort of the last thing you need to complete so that we can review your registration and approve it. And an evaluation is conducted by a licensed Pet Partners evaluator. Our evaluators are volunteers as well. We call them volunteer leaders. They have gone through special training in order to get that license. In the vast majority of cases, they are handlers themselves as well, meaning they also volunteer with their animal, so they have firsthand experience out in facilities with their pet. The licensed team evaluator moves through 20 plus exercises. It usually takes somewhere between 35 and 45 minutes, just depending on the efficiency of the evaluator, the efficiency of the team, things like that. And the first half of the evaluation is all about obedience. So we start there. And like I said, it's species-specific obedience exercises. If you don't have a dog and you are curious, or even if you have a dog, but especially for non-canines who might be wondering what are species-specific obedience exercises, we do have evaluation overviews available to our prospective volunteers, so you can take a peek at what it is we are looking for in the evaluation and what your animal would be expected after registered to sort of be able to do on visits as well. To get to those evaluation overviews, you log into your volunteer center account. Maybe somebody can throw the link up there for how to get to your account. If you don't have one, you can set them up. They're free. But when you get into your volunteer center account, we have a resource library. You just click on that, you can type in your species. So if you have a rabbit, type in rabbit, and one of the first results is going to be that evaluation overview where you can see what these obedience exercises in the first half of the evaluation look like for your species. The second half, on the other hand, is more about simulating a therapy animal visit environment where we're actually going to be assessing your aptitude to sort of navigate and thrive in situations you may see on a therapy animal visit. So, for example, a loud noise will happen. And your animal will be exposed to treats, meaning they'll know that there's some treats on the table. They will be crowded by 2 or 3 individuals to kind of see how they navigate being petted by multiple people at once and sort of what is their stress level when that happens. Also, how do you as a handler advocate for them in that situation? Maybe your animal loves being petted by multiple people at once. Maybe they don't, and that's okay. What you would do in that situation in the evaluation is say, hey, my dog really wants to interact with each of you. I think he would like it even better if he could get some one-on-one time with each one of you. So could we take turns petting Fluffy? So in those aptitude exercises, we're looking for how your animal responds. We're also looking for how you navigate the therapy animal visit environment. At the end of the evaluation, if you pass, you receive one of 2 ratings, predictable or complex, and it's sort of based on your score. Predictable teams are teams who can only visit in what we call predictable settings. I'm not going to spend a ton of time getting into that, but as the name suggests, it means that these are facilities where the team can kind of anticipate what's coming. There's not going to be a lot of emergencies happening or lots of commotion, lots and lots of loud noises, things like that. You can also pass with a rating of complex, which means that you are able to visit in more complex environments. Now, if you don't pass the evaluation, in most cases, you will receive what's called a score of not ready, or NR, you'll sometimes hear it referred to. And that simply means that the evaluator that day didn't see the skills and aptitudes that they needed to in order to pass you, in order to be able to register. But there is a good portion of people who do get a not ready on their first try. It's not abnormal. A lot of times it can be related to maybe just not quite expecting what happened in the room, which is a really good reason to pay a lot of attention to that training and to make sure that you're availing yourself of other resources we make free so that you really understand what to expect in the evaluation. Sometimes we find it's nerves that gets in the way the first time you go through an evaluation, even though every evaluator I have met has been really welcoming and sort of understands that this can be nerve-wracking, but sometimes nerves get in the way. And then we do see not readies just because maybe the animal is a little bit too young or a little bit too excited. That can happen a lot as well. And I don't mean too young as in they don't meet the eligibility requirements, but for those of you of Labrador retrievers or have known one, you know that sometimes a 1-year-old Labrador is still very much a young puppy, and maybe they need a little bit more time to sort of settle as they age. So we see not readies for a lot of reasons. It is nothing, again, to be alarmed about, and all it means is you can come back and try again a couple of weeks or a couple of months later. So you can get a score of not ready, you can get a score of passing with 2 different ratings as sort of a subset of that passing score. We can move on. And I believe this is the last slide. So thanks for hanging in there with me for all 30 minutes. But this is the last slide, and then I'll address questions and comments. Up on your screen, you'll see some of the benefits of registration with pet partners. The couple I want to highlight is, first of all, liability insurance. When you want to volunteer with your animal, 99.9% of facilities are going to require that you have insurance, and that is a benefit that you get when you become a pet partners team. The other thing I just want to point out too is that we, I think, do a great job of making sure that all of our volunteers have access to continuing education and resources. Many are free. Some might have a small cost, but you can always just avail yourself of the free resources as well. We really believe that being a handler is a skill that develops over time, and we want you to get better and better with each passing visit and each passing year. And we try to give you as many educational materials and resources that we can, kind of to help you on that journey. And again, if some of our current volunteers listening want to chime in, I think if you take on this volunteerism, it usually ends up being so fun and so fulfilling that you start to treat it more and more seriously, and you want to learn more. And so we do our best to make sure we're producing those materials for you. So that's all I have. I am going to now just take a minute to scroll back through comments and see if I need to add anything based on what's been said. I know a lot of questions have also been answered right in the comments. Okay, so somebody asked here that Susie, around she understands the visit limit is 2 hours, but do you have any suggestions on total number of visits per week or per month? I think, again, the same advice that Cherry gave around when you're new is start slow. You don't want to schedule 2 visits a week right after you get registered, no matter how short they are, because you don't yet know exactly what's going to feel right for you, and if you need more of a break in between, or maybe you'll find after your first visit, like, maybe this isn't the right facility environment for me, but you've already scheduled one for 2 days later. Then you have to go back and unschedule it. So I would say, again, when you're starting off, to go slow and maybe pace them at most every couple of weeks. In terms of, though, after you kind of get the hang of it, I think it really depends on your animal, and let your animal guide you. If they just love this and find it really invigorating and you've got time, I think people in that category typically visit once a week. There are some people that will visit because they've got lots of time a couple of times a week, but a lot of people really keep it to once a week. I'd say that's most common. But there's also nothing wrong with doing it more infrequently. If any current volunteers have any thoughts on suggestions for total number of visits per week or per month, chime in. But I think once a week is a pretty standard schedule for folks who have that amount of time available. I'm going to scroll up a little bit more. Is there a cost associated with the trainings? Yes, and somebody already beat me to the punch and typed it in there, but there is a $70 charge for the online course if you choose to do the online component. If not component, the online version is what I mean. If you choose to do an in-person workshop, which are, again, due to the pandemic, not as widely available right now, the costs associated with that can vary. In some cases, they're free. In some cases, they're more expensive than the online course. And the reason the prices can vary is because the instructors who teach them are, because they're volunteers, are allowed to pass on the costs to the people attending. So if they have to rent a room or print a bunch of materials and that costs them $300 to do, they are allowed to charge the 6 handlers attending $50 to recoup their costs. They don't earn money for themselves doing this or profit. It's just to cover their costs. So if you are doing the in-person component or the in-person version, excuse me, the costs can vary, but for the online course, it's $70. Scrolling up here, please keep the questions coming if you've got time. I certainly have another 5 or 7 minutes. Hang around. So somebody asked at the very beginning, so this has probably been addressed, that this is a prospective volunteer, hi Lori, who has completed the online handlers course and passed the assessments associated with that. What are the next steps? The next steps would be to start looking for an evaluation. Also, one of the registration steps is making sure you've had a recent veterinarian visit. And I will say right now that I'm hearing from a lot of people that getting into the vet is very difficult right now. A lot of vets are not taking new patients. And it's just a long wait. I know I had to get my dog's nails trimmed recently, and I had to wait 2 weeks for a 5-minute appointment. So if you are at the step like Lori is, where you've got the course done and you're looking for things to do, of course, scheduling evaluation is one of them, but the other is checking to see if you need a vet visit or if you had one recent enough to count towards your registration. So that's another thing you can work on. And Lori also mentions that they've done the CGC, or the Canine Good Citizen. I would just encourage you, Lori, too, to make sure you understand how our evaluation is different from CGC, because that is something we see sometimes where folks have been through evaluations in other situations and they sort of expect it to look a little bit the same. And there certainly are some similarities for canines, but they aren't the same. So you might want to spend some time, really understanding the differences and practicing the skills and exercises that are specific to the pet partner's evaluation. Are huge bunnies allowed to be in a stroller or sit on a towel on a lap instead of in a basket? Wonderful question. So our smaller animals, pocket pets, do have a little bit more flexibility with what equipment they can use when visiting, but equipment needs to be approved by pet partners if it's not part of our standard equipment list. And I already see somebody beat me to the comment there and said it's really a case by case basis. And the Julia, my colleagues who helping with some of this, she put in the contact us form. So just like with medications, if you feel like you might need a special piece of equipment because of your animal, always reach out to us first via that form and we can help assess your specific situation. But there is a little bit more flexibility with certain species of animals to use something like that. But it's not always a given either. But I can see how a very large rabbit in a basket would be difficult. You also asked about laying something on somebody's lap. This is actually something that goes for a lot of species. We call that a barrier. And in a lot of cases, even if you have a small dog who is going to be placed in laps, you're required to use a barrier for a lot of different reasons. So actually, you're kind of thinking ahead on that one and asking. So that's great. So this is a great question from Joellen. Does the handler have the opportunity to visit the evaluation center prior to bringing the animal to understand the layout, which, as you point out, can be dependent on the individual evaluator preference? This is a wonderful question. So typically, no, you won't have the opportunity to visit like a day or two prior and get a sense of what the evaluation is going to look like. Like I said, a lot of our evaluators are volunteers. Most of them want to keep costs very low for you all as handlers, so they take donated space. So the community center might donate them a room for 4 hours on a Saturday, or the library might do it for 3 hours on a Monday night. And so it's not accessible to people before the donated time is available. I will say that evaluators generally do a really good job when you enter into the room to give you time to, especially if you have a dog who wants to smell everything, to be able to get that out and really get comfortable in the environment for a few minutes prior to the exercises beginning. You won't be asked to immediately go right into it without even having a chance for you or your animal to check out the space. Now, if your evaluator doesn't offer you that time, maybe they forgot or it's not part of their processes, even though it should be, but people make mistakes. Ask your evaluator, can I have a few minutes to walk my animal around the room? And they will usually accommodate that, no problem. In terms of layout, yes, they can be a little bit different, but you won't see anything wildly different than what you see in our evaluation videos or what is described in the evaluation overview. There is an exercise where cones might be used by one evaluator, whereas painter's tape marking an X on the spot might be used by another evaluator. So you'll see some of those differences, or you might see that they place their evaluation assistants sitting on this side of the room versus that side of the room. But as much as we can, we ask our evaluators to keep things consistent so that you as a handler kind of know what to expect based on what you see in training. And also remember, as a pet partners volunteer, you have to get it reevaluated every 2 years. And so we want to make sure that when you have your second evaluation 2 years down the road, you're not wildly surprised by things that you see in the room. So I hope that answers your questions. Oh, good, Elizabeth. Maybe somebody already. Elizabeth and Sherry, good, way to come in there. So the other option that I didn't mention to you, Joellen, but I think it's an important one, is if you have an evaluator in your area who's conducting evaluations for other teams, going and helping at their evaluations and actually watching how they conduct them can be really good practice for you, but also it's really helpful to our evaluators. Elizabeth can chime in and say, but like sometimes it can be hard to find the assistance to help you at evaluations. Every evaluator needs to have 3 people helping them, because we need people getting in there and petting the animals, strangers, crowding, petting, things like that. So they need help. And so you would be doing a great service to them by also donating some of your time to be those people that they need. And even evaluators who have really consistent, wonderful volunteer assistants who help them, they love to take new people and give their regulars a break. So you certainly can do that. And I'm not seeing any other questions come in, and I have been rambling for 45 minutes. So I'm going to wrap it up here and let everybody go and just say thank you again for hanging out with me, asking great questions, learning more about Pet Partners. We really hope that if this is the right fit for you, you can consider joining us. And we are always here to help. Use that Contact Us feature that's been posted, and we can answer any individual questions you have that you didn't bring forth today. Okay? Take care, everybody.